Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to another episode of Managing Your Small Business Through the Pandemic series, our 49th consecutive week of being here Wednesday at noon and at 12 o'clock noon exactly. Good afternoon. I'm Kelly Bearden. I'm your host today, and we'll be going through the latest and changes and a lot of the things going on with a lot of the relief programs with the pandemic. So as some of you might know, we're part of the Central California region of the SBDC, the Small Business Development Center program. And that region is Central California from the Pacific Ocean to the state of Nevada, down to the southern reaches of Kern County, where our offices are located in downtown Bakersfield, and then on to the Eastern Sierra, where we also cover Inyo and Mono counties, all the way up to the state of Nevada. So in that region, we do have other centers that provide assistance for you, such as a center in Clovis with the Clovis College, in Merced at UC Merced, in Modesto with the Opportunity Stanislaus, also in Salinas, and also in San Luis Obispo with Cal Poly SLO. So reach out to anybody, any of our centers, if you have any questions, if you need any answers, any consulting, any questions you have on the processes that you have and we go over today. So Webinar Wednesdays made possible through a number of our sponsors. I haven't mentioned them in a few weeks. So we're very grateful for the support and being an economic development partner with the County of Kern. Mid-State Development Corporation. We're part of the CSU Bakersfield School of Business and Public Administration. Great support from the school there. And also the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, and it is always powered nationally. And that program is powered nationally by SBA, the Small Business Administration. Just a couple of notes of programs that are coming up. Last week, I think many of you that were on last week noticed our presenter here for a webinar we're doing on Wednesday afternoon in conjunction with the Kern County Hispanic and Black Chambers of Commerce and Mid-State Development. We're going to have Celeste Young Ramos back, and she's going to talk about a number of key topics for small businesses that are pretty much food driven, but it really is beneficial for a lot of businesses that actually have employees. And so it's labor law, a lot of different topics. That is going to be from 3 to 5 on Friday. And then also next Tuesday, in conjunction with the Valley Community SBDC out of Clovis College. Rich Mostert and I are getting together, and Rich is putting on a great little program here, Meet the CDFIs. You've heard us talk a lot about the community development financial institutions and how funds are becoming available through a variety of different sources from these nonprofit lenders. And Rich has done a great job of pulling together 6 of them that are actually providing service in the San Joaquin Valley. So we'll get a panel hearing from the 6 and what they do. And so if you're looking for a smaller size loan generally, but they do projects up to, many of them up to 250,000 or more. Tune in next Tuesday between 10 and 11:30. So what's up today? Today, February 17th, 2021. Well, we stumbled on a little bit of an update with the PPP forgiveness. The PPP forgiveness form 3508 has been updated. Before it reflected $50,000 and less, and now it's up to $150,000. We'll go through that form today and look into some of the other forgiveness aspects that are out there. It's been a while since we've talked about forgiveness, and still 2/3 of the original PPP loans have not actually applied for forgiveness yet. So maybe it's a good time to jump into that. We're going to talk about a few of the interesting details that are coming out of the new stimulus package. And this is the $1.9 trillion President Biden package, as it's called. It could be the first one that is passed without bipartisan support of both parties. So we'll get into that and talk about some of those details. We're going to jump into the SBA numbers on PPP and some of the trends. I think the numbers are important, especially when we have a limited amount of $284 billion. And like I'm known to say, $284 billion just doesn't go as far as it used to. Shuttered Venues has new FAQs that came out since we've last met last week on February 10th. And so we'll briefly pull those up. We still do not have a portal that's open through SBA, and they are not accepting applications yet, but hopefully that is going to happen very soon. But a lot of the FAQs answered a lot of questions. We saw EIDL this week hit a milestone for the EIDL loan. Remember, we have 3 versions of EIDL that we talk about usually here on Wednesdays. The EIDL loan is the program that is the economic injury disaster loan through SBA, which is the loan process that you go through that opened middle part of last March and is open through the end of the year, but now they are up to 200 billion loaned. So kind of a milestone with the EIDL program, a program we're fond of and see a lot of support and great things that it does for small businesses. A very brief update on testing, tiers, and vaccine. Matter of fact, I'll probably just do that right now. We were hoping to get some guidance on Tuesday when the governor comes out, when Governor Newsom comes out with an update on the tier system, of which last look, I believe 99.8% of Californians were still in the purple tier. And I believe that's still true. So there was a little change yesterday with the tiers. We're hoping that changes because we're seeing, at least in Kern County, a substantial reduction, particularly the last 3 days, 3 or 4 days, with cases down the last 2 days under 200. And when we were talking a few months back, we were looking at cases, coronavirus positive cases confirmed, upwards of 1,000 per day. So really seeing some great movement there. And these programs are great about getting money and surviving the pandemic that we go over today. But really, the real emphasis here is getting your businesses open and getting your cash flow going again to support and sustain your business over the long haul. So I think everybody's hearing enough on vaccine. The vaccines apparently in the San Joaquin Valley aren't going very well throughout the entire valley. Saw an interesting note that Blue Shield of California has come on, and they're going to be doing, particularly in areas like the San Joaquin Valley, a lot of vaccinations. We're seeing pharmacies and some other places that are popping up in a lot of different areas. And hopefully we can get the vaccine and get it out and get on down the road with this thing. And of course, as always, your questions. And today, please go to the question box, the Q&A. We'll go hit Q&A and try to get through all of your questions that you have today. I'll try to provide an answer. Don't always do that, but we try. Anything else that you might add, you might want to put in the chat. And if you go to the chat, you'll see some links that Maureen has put in for some of the programs that we have coming up and some of the things that we talk about today, where you can grab those instantly and do something with if you so desire. So, and plus, if I come and ask a couple things like, maybe related to our poll, I might ask you to put a couple things in the chat that come to us regarding what you're seeing out there, because it's really important as we get such a large number of small businesses in one place. It's really making our job a lot easier if we can determine what is going on. And your input for a lot of the programs that are going on is really vital in providing us with positive feedback and a direction on what's really happening in the real world. So let's jump to our first poll today. And actually, it's our only poll with a pretty heavy amount of information to go through. Just one poll today. And what I really was hoping was, yesterday I heard in a meeting, in an online meeting in the Eastern Sierra, heard really the first person that received information on the EIDL grant. And that's that SBA generated email that's going to come from SBA. And it's the first one that I had heard. So it made me want to ask the question about what you have heard from a number of these sources. And so let me launch the poll and explain it to you. So have you heard recently, favorable or unfavorable, about any application that you have filed for the following open programs? PPP second draw, have you heard that you have been accepted or you have been approved? Also, the EIDL grant, if you have received information from SBA directly that you have information to provide on the EIDL grant. We have the California Relief Grant Program, which the final phase closed a week ago. I don't know how many of you are actually getting the first phase information on that or the second phase. If it's your first time filing for PPP, have you heard back that your program has been approved? And then also on the forgiveness aspect, have you heard any of these favorable or unfavorable that you might have applied for recently? We'll try to make these recently. So getting a lot of feedback on PPP2. It sounds like a lot of people are getting in and getting, I'm assuming that that's going to be favorable that you're hearing about PPP, especially the second draw, because if you meet some of the requirements we've gone through. So getting a good feedback there, and also PPP forgiveness and first draw. Okay, well, we've got about 40% of you that are in now. Give you another couple. This is kind of a tougher question to answer, and you can select multiple choices on this. So I'll give you just a little bit more time than usual. But again, it's, have you heard favorably or unfavorably about an application, PPP2, the EIDL grants, California Relief Grant Program, which ended last week? Last Monday, a week ago Monday, for the second phase. And let's end the poll and share the results with you. So with about 46% of you in on my convoluted type of question, I'm going to share the results here. And what we see is 67% of you have heard on the PPP second draw. That's really good. Another 25% on the PPP first draw. 35% of you have heard on forgiveness. So that's right around the trend we're seeing is about 1/3 have heard positively or other than on the PPP forgiveness process. 18% on the EIDL grant. That's great. So we have a number of you have been contacted by SBA. So that process is starting to open up. And again, we'll kind of go over the parameters for that, but that's if you received the EIDL advance last year, and that was less than the $10,000, which was the maximum amount, and you're in a lower income census tract area, which is kind of a crapshoot from what I'm really kind of understanding with some of these census tracts that we're looking at. But let's stop sharing and let's roll on. So thank you all very much for participating. That provides more information than I thought I had seen, particularly on the EIDL grant. It's good to hear that some people are starting to get information and hear from SBA. Hey, it's been a while since I've had a birthday greeting and a birthday on Wednesday, so I got to give it up to my mom. My mom, Anita, who is 88 today, looking great and doing great. A picture of us a couple years back at an Independence Day celebration. So Mom, I know you're not watching or listening, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Happy birthday, and I will see you tonight. So let's start with a little bit of a status of key programs that are out there. So a status of key stimulus programs. And we've started changing this around a little bit as we've been able to, but it's just kind of like the key programs. And many of you obviously know that SBA second draw PPP is open. And also we're seeing that the first draw is open to newer firms that couldn't apply the first time. And then also certain nonprofits. So that's open for both of those. Our $15 billion that's out there in the shuttered venues and theaters, Save Our Stages, $15 billion, hopefully will be opening soon, as will the Employee Retention Tax Credit, although we do have news on that that we'll share with you. So there is some news regarding unforgiven PPP amounts. If you were unforgiven for some labor amounts, you could retroactively go back last year. We'll mention a little bit about that. The EIDL loan program remains open, as it has been for most of the time since March of 2020. And the old advance is now forgiven by SBA. Another thing on the status of some of the key programs that are open include also a topic of today, PPP forgiveness. And you're going to want to file soon. The easy changes were actually changes to Form S and also allowed for new expenditures, even retroactively going back to your covered period from last year. Also tax deductibility and unemployment for displaced contractors. So again, you're going to want to see your lenders on the PPP. If you're having a problem with a lender, I get some of the emails and people are having issues, and try to get it resolved. There's a lot of circumstances that are really unique to a lot of different businesses. And we're finding with a lot of lenders that they are not being able to either process the loans, or they're running into some issues. You might want to give them another shot and then see another lender. We're going to get into some of the PPP numbers. There doesn't seem to be a huge rush out there. It doesn't seem like the funds are drying up. So you do have time to get in your second round of PPP, or actually your first round of the Paycheck Protection Program if needed. We'll have the SBA portal open hopefully soon for the actual shuttered venues. And it is kind of interesting what's come out from IRS this week on retention tax credit and being able to retroactively go back and file an amended 941 and claim that for last year. We will talk about that a little bit, or contact your tax professional on that. The EIDL loan is still open. EIDL grant, we're getting information that people are starting to get notified that they are in that census tract and they can provide monthly information and then get that and move that forward. And that is an EIDL grant between $1,000 and $9,000. Then we're going to get into the PPP forgiveness. The form is not soon, the form is now. The form is going to be today. And also some of the tax deductible issues, and again, the unemployment. So one thing I kind of wanted to clarify that we haven't probably clarified over, the last, several weeks, is we talk about needing and requiring additional guidance. And usually the guidance comes in two different forms. And we'll jump in and look at that in just a moment, what the form looks like and how it comes from SBA if you ever want to pull it yourself. But, the additional guidance can come a number of different ways. It can come on the new form that we see. And the form opens up a lot of questions, and it opens up a lot of answers in that respect too. So it could also come in the form of one of the SBA interim final rules. So it also can come in the form of SBA PPP's frequently asked questions. And the frequently asked questions are generally intended for lenders, but they give borrowers a lot of information, and also people that host webinars for that matter. So one thing to keep in mind is we have dealt with, over the last 49 weeks, we have dealt with a lot of changes for these programs and these rules. But when you make a decision and you have a decision in place at time, SBA will honor whatever rules were in place at that time. So if they come out and change the rule next week, but say you applied, and I think one of the earlier forms of that was the actual definition of who could apply for PPP. And that was if there was a likelihood of economic uncertainty caused by the coronavirus. And if that was the case, then you could apply. Now, they might have come back later and changed and said, or defined what economic uncertainty is or was, which they really, I don't believe, did. But if they would have, and when you applied, you were applying under that particular rules and those set of rules. So when we talk about interim final rules and it being an oxymoron, it's totally an oxymoron, because it's the interim final rule. It's the final rule as of this day, but it's subject to change. And it changes by legislation, and it can also change by program regulatory compliance, and provides those details. So here's some of the things that we have received guidance on recently, or we will be receiving more. And really the one that really kind of jumps out is, of course, we have new stuff that we're going to be showing on the venues. There will be more interim rules that are posted to define kind of how these programs are meant to be and how they go. It's going to really be needed on the employee retention tax credit. We're really waiting for that one. Kind of jumps out at you. As far as the tax deductibility for CARES Act other funds, and those are kind of like the local programs, I'm sticking with the interpretation that is in the IRS code now, and that is forgivable debt. Forgivable debt is taxable income. There was an exception made to that in the Economic Aid Act at the end of the year that said that the PPP was not subjected to that. But if you received locally in Kern County, maybe Kern Recovers funds, or if you received BCARES funds, and we'll be talking soon about other City of Bakersfield programs that are coming out. My interpretation on that, until there's other guidance provided by SBA, is that you have a law and there's nothing in it to go away from that. So those are things to talk to about with your tax advisor and the person in charge of your individual finances, but that's kind of how I read it. Okay, let's jump to some of these websites that are out there. And let's see what we have out here now. Come to this wonderful new share. So here's our new form. Let's start with the new form. And actually, before we hit the new form, let's go over a couple of things that we just discussed first. We'll come back to this. But let me just show you real quick what are the SBA frequently asked questions. And you can Google these, PPP, SBA, FAQs, and they'll show up. And they've changed by, originally there have been 53 of them over time, and they go back all the way from the beginning of the first CARES Act program in early April of 2020. So you see in red there that they're in the process of being revised, because when there were congressional changes with the law with the last stimulus program, the Economic Aid Act, it changed a lot of the old rules that were already provided guidance on. So we already had frequently asked questions. So that's what you see there in red. But this is an excellent source. And when these update is when we actually have information to update for you. So this is part of the process that, I go through and I glean, and you're able to do this once if you want to on your own too. So the frequently asked programs are good. And then also we talked a little bit about interim final rules, and they come in much more of a legal structure and come in this wonderful double-spaced text that define all the rules and regulations for when we start pulling things out. So again, you're only responsible for what the rules are at the time you make the decision. Keep that in mind. The rules are going to change, and they have been changing pretty much all along. And a perfect example of that is right here, is our Paycheck Protection Form 3508S. Originally, the 3508 form came out in early October, and it came out, it was different. It came out with only a limitation of up to 50,000 and less could actually apply and go through the one-page form, but now it's two-page form. Now, a few things that we're going to be talking about in just a little bit. Very simple form. The second page is the voluntary disclosure of information, of demographic information. And I always recommend that people do it because it just provides more data, and more data is always good. So here's our form, the new 3508S. And so one of the things that jumps out at me right away at this form is you have a first draw or you have a second draw. And I got to believe this is going to change on this, because right now, those of you that have gone through the PPP process, and if you've applied for a loan based on your 2019 information, that is 150,000 or less, you did not have to provide anything other than your sales on a quarterly basis in aggregate that showed a 25% reduction for one of those quarters between your revenues in 2019 and 2020. That's all. That is all you had to show. And if you're coming in here and now getting pretty much close to, not actual, but automatic forgiveness for a PPP2, I got to think that that's going to change. And one of the reasons I think it's going to change is the heightened level of attention that is being placed on fraud. And if we have time, we'll jump a little bit into that today, because I think really kind of the fraud is driving a lot of the policies and a lot of the changes that are happening. So I think that this really well could change, and there could be more of a tougher process for the second PPP loan, to where you do notice also with the PPP application that they say at the time of forgiveness, you're going to be bringing it in. So they almost tell you this form is going to be remodified and you're going to be supplying information if you did not supply it initially through your application process. Some lenders are asking for that information. They're asking for sales information that show your 25% drop, but I got to think that that's going to change. Other than that, we just have kind of the contact information that you're getting used to seeing on a lot of these forms. You're getting, this is a little bit new, where you have your covered period. And recall that you can, if your PPP1 loan was issued before June 5th, you can elect an 8 or a 24-week covered period. So your covered period is going to start on the day that you receive those funds. And if those funds are wired into your bank like they were for most borrowers, that is the day it begins. And if you elect the 24-week period, what you do is you add 167 days to that, and then that's the end of your covered period. So your covered period is crucial for identifying the period of time to when your PPP expenses, even though you're not going to be providing them, your PPP expenses are going to be used. And the reason I keep bringing kind of that aspect up and the fraud aspect is because what you're going to see here is a number of certifications that you make as a borrower. And we've talked about several of these in the past, of which you sign, of which you say you're providing true and correct material information, that you used them under eligible uses. You used 60% or more for payroll if you're doing that calculation. So you are making this assertion. And the SBA reserves the right to come back. And one thing that they are really showing a lot in this form is they are really suggesting that you retain the information for 3 years for actual expense information and 4 years for payroll information. So they are going to reserve the right to audit. And if they continue to have of what I don't think is unnecessarily, I mean, we live with fraud every day. Every day somebody's trying to get your money. But the more attention that gets, the more scrutiny the SBA AIG, their investigative general, is going to get into this information. So it's that simple, though. Putting down the amount of loans you spend on payroll, the amount of forgiveness. Let's say my example would be I have a $100,000 PPP loan. I spent exactly 60% on payroll. So that would be the $60,000 here. And my total forgiveness, $100,000. And then I make the certification that I did indeed use those for eligible uses. And then you sign under penalty of perjury. Very simple for your first PPP round. And that's gonna consume about 86% of the PPP loans. Now, for those of you that do not actually, that have 150,000 or more, first of all, congratulations. That's not a bad thing. It just means you're going to go through a more detailed process. So that detailed process is going to be generally with one of the other two forms. And the other two forms are here somewhere. Right there. So let me reshare that form. And don't want to share that. So we'll come back to that in just a second and try to get that back again. There we go. So this is the form that is the 3508. This is the first original monster, the 11-page form. And we're not going to go into great detail on this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to encourage those that have questions over 150, because there are a lot of different variables that go into this. And there are those safe harbor rules that we talked about, where you have safe harbor, where you can, you know, if you were shut down and your business was impacted, you know, it comes right down here with this box right here. You know, if a reduction for your full-time equivalents, safe harbor 1, and there's safe harbor 2 that are kind of for businesses that have had a lot of closures and a lot of other things. So what I'm going to recommend, if you have questions on this, is to reach out and contact me, and let's go over this on a case-by-case basis. We'll schedule some time and go over your questions and your concerns if you're doing the long form of the Paycheck Protection Program, or if you have any questions before you need to talk to your CPA or other advisor. Okay, so that's the long form, the 3508. Now we also have the other form up here, and that is going to be the wonderful EZ form. And so our EZ form, which is right there, is kind of a halfway point between our 3508 short form and our 3508 full form. So again, you're going to be putting in covered information. And again, this can be used for larger size loans that meet certain criteria. So 3 options. We haven't covered them in a while. We do have the short form that covers most of you. It's just coming back to those certifications that you're going to see, and you're going to be asked to certify under perjury. But a little bit more information on the EZ required for those that are 150 and over. Okay, so a little bit about forgiveness there. And let's jump back and kind of go through some of the other guidance that we've received this week. So one of the things that was interesting that came out this week, and this has to do with the new stimulus that is being proposed. Again, what is being talked about is a $1.9 trillion package. The package, I don't think, if what I'm about to talk about, I don't think it's going to hit us until about April, but I believe it is going to hit us because it does not need bipartisan support. It is apparently working its way through the House and will likely work its way through the Senate. It'll change by the time it hits the Senate and is signed by the president, but it will ultimately, most likely, at least in my opinion, it will be happening. So some interesting things that are going on here. We'll jump in a little bit about what's going on with PPP2. And first of all, what you're going to see in PPP2 is that the hospitality industry has received about $23 billion of the funds outstanding, which is 18%. And that is nearly of $125 billion. So that is where we stand as of 2 days ago, 125 billion of the 284. Again, that is up about 25 billion from last week. So no big, huge increases. It seems like that the funding is stable and sound if we just kind of look at some of the numbers. Some of the things that are really interesting is that you see with those that have the NAICS code of 72 XXXXX. So if it starts with a 7.2, which is going to be your hospitality, so it's going to be lodging properties and restaurants and other food venues and maybe some bars and others, you're going to see that you get the 3.5 times the monthly salary. And look at that, 130,000 is the average size. That compares to only 78,000. We won't jump into, I did have queued up earlier, I showed you the PPP data. I think this covers the majority of the information that we need to hit today. So in that is going to be more benefits in that stimulus act, the 1.9 trillion, it's 25 billion that looks like it's coming out of the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. So if you recall, of that 1.9 trillion, 50 billion of it was for business purposes, and half of it's going, apparently, at what we know today, is going for this particular purpose. So you have 5 billion that is allocated for businesses that are less than 500,000 in sales. And during the first 3 weeks, it's going to be projected that applications from restaurants owned by women, veterans, and socially and economic disadvantaged individuals are going to be prioritized. But here's some interesting stuff. And I don't know if all this is going to stick. Number one, restaurants can apply for up to 10 million, physical cap of 5 million. And look at how grants are going to be calculated on this. Grants are calculated by subtracting the 2020 revenue from 2019 revenue. That seems, even for a restaurant loving gentleman like myself. And I didn't mention, my mom, whose birthday today, was in the restaurant industry business for many, many, many years. But if you're looking at a restaurant that grossed 2.5 million, and then in 2019 and 2020 went down to $1 million, that would be a $1.5 million grant for that one restaurant. And I just don't know if that 25 billion is going to hold up to all that. But we'll see. This is likely going to be passed into law within it, probably in the next 3 to 4 weeks. There's a number of grants. There's a lot of support for this, for specific hospitality and restaurants. And look, originally it was $120 billion that came down to 25. So a lot of love for the hospitality industry that has been hurt. A lot of other industries have been hurt as well. The one thing that doesn't look like it's going to make it out of that particular $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan is going to be the federal minimum wage of $15 an hour. We're pretty much now immune to that, well, I wouldn't say immune, it's still affecting businesses every day. You tell me about that all the time. But we're up to $14 of the $15 we're scaling to. But if you go back to, say, let's go to Alabama, where the minimum wage, the federal minimum wage is $7.25. You're talking about some significant changes and differences, and cost of living changes that are really going to affect that as well. And we saw a lot of support for the Restaurants Act, where 90 out of 100 senators voiced support for the Restaurant Relief Fund. And again, these are going to be funds that are not going to be able to be used double dipping or being used twice. So if you have a PPP2 and you're using that for payroll and a variety of other programs, they're not going to most likely going to be able to be used for those. There could be some actual things that come out that actually say if you received a PPP2, you get a limited amount. There's a lot of changes that are going to happen to that thing. But let me tell you, restaurant owners out there, it's coming. Okay. So one thing that I haven't really done is really jumped into the second draw PPP seasonal calculation. And being called to the task on this recently, here it is. And it is a little bit more for you seasonal businesses, a little bit more advantageous than the last calculation that we had. And what you're going to see is that, again, you're going to be selecting the average total monthly payments for payroll for any 12-week period. So that's going to be 1 week short of a quarter, but for any 12-week period. And it can be done anytime between February 15th and February 15th, 2020. So again, those seasonal businesses can use the 3.5 multiplier if they're in the NACE code 72, that begins with 72. And then there's another criteria here for establishing a seasonal business that operates 7 months a year. And that's what this is. It's defined as a seasonal business that operates 7 months or less per year, or in the preceding calendar year had gross receipts for any 6 months period, not more than 33% of the other 6 months. So a working definition that we're working with and going with right now, and hopefully that helps our winter seasonal businesses in looking at it. It seemed to have a preference toward summer, but we'll see when we see it in real application. Okay, so a little bit more on the PPP forgiveness. Again, you still need the 60%. As far as your EIDL advance that you received, we've talked about this the last few weeks, that as part of the Economic Aid Act, it removed actually the non-forgiveness aspect of your EIDL advance. So that's always good news. And also we found out that those of you that actually repaid your EIDL advance at forgiveness will now be reimbursed for that. And that should be happening probably in the next week or two. So the lender will be notifying you if you had it reamortized. So if you didn't pay it off and say you received a $10,000 EIDL advance, the rest of your PPP through forgiveness was forgiven, you then owed $10,000. If you carried that over into a loan, it affected your interest. Now that that's going to be taken off the books, and there could be a reamortization and some accrued interest that's paid to you. Okay, just a little bit, and I just bring up the fraud thing, and we're going to jump in and look at that. This came from a U.S. attorney, and it was basically, rest assured, we will not punish companies that access stimulus funds in good faith, nor make mistakes. And we saw an honest mistake. We saw a borrower who actually did a typo, ended up with a larger PPP loan, PPP1 loan, than they were entitled to. They found out at forgiveness. It went through the bank, SBA funded. So they ended up receiving about $20,000 more than they would have. And that was pretty much resolved with it wasn't forgiven. It wasn't forgiven, but they were able to term that out over the 1% loan over 5 years with their lender. So honest mistakes do happen. Fraud happens with intent. So just jump into this real quick. And do maybe a new share and go back to the fraud, and it's not there. Maybe a new share. There we are. Okay, so the one thing that I want to share with you is a website that I look at. I enjoy it. You can disregard the ads here, but it's one Small Business Biz Trends, and they have a lot of good information. And I was really intrigued by what they have here as far as PPP fraud. And they break out what they have witnessed as far as being the crimes. This is a huge number where attempted fraud. We've been looking at, we're looking at $650 billion that was rolled out. And to this point, I believe there's around 350 million that has been attempted to be defrauded. A lot of that was caught. So what people are doing is they're misusing the loans for personal spending sprees. So they're spending a lot of luxury items, and they're taking the funds that were supposed to go for 60% for payroll. So those unauthorized purchases of generally luxury purchases, a lot of the crimes that are out there that the feds are going after are those that make up actual fake employees to qualify for the loans and forging payroll tax returns and bank statements. Some people are inventing companies that didn't even exist. And then there are others, and I think we've used a few examples of these in the past, that they're trying to steal the identity of real business owners and employee and get the payment moved over to them. So you've seen millions of dollars spent on an extravagant shopping sprees, and these things which were purchased, yachts and fast boats and hoarding money. And, some of the accused aren't your normal cyber criminals, I would think. There's a Hollywood producer, okay, LA, I see it. A reality TV star, not. A pro football player was actually caught. Recording artist, medical doctor, and others. So about 341. The SBA has taken a real aggressive stance for this. And, they do have a lot of tools and weapons going afterwards. Remember, this money was put out for a purpose quickly because it was going to be needed when the pandemic hit. But, people knew what they were applying for. And, there's a lot of tools that they have in working with the lender on movement of money and movement of withdrawals from those particular accounts. And so there's a lot of things that are going on, and the investigators are several out there. So one of the things that's, again, it's honest mistakes happen. So and then they give a lot of different examples, but I just my point on all this is that being up to about 350 million in fraud, it's going to continue, and there's going to be some changes that happen. And there's generally no problem when that fraud occurs, at least when the fraud happens, on how it's going to drive future policy and how it's going to drive forgiveness of your PPP loans, for example, that we looked at. Okay, grants for shuttered venues. Hey, grants for shuttered venues. Talked a lot about this. We did receive some guidance. Let's go quickly to this guidance. That's here, and do a new share. And so the shuttered grants right here. This is information that came out from SBA. We'll include this in the link that we send out, but it's out there now. And it's a little bit more than 12 pages on frequently asked questions that are coming. I really think we'll learn a lot when the platform is opened on what you can and cannot do. But for those of you that are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, because recall, you can't apply for both the Shuttered Venue Operator Grant and PPP2. You can apply for PPP2, but if you accept it, we're running into issues now timeline-wise. And if you take a PPP2, if you accept it, then right now they're saying you cannot actually apply for this. Now, whether if you could pay it back or not, and then apply if it's more advantageous for the SVOG, we'll see. But what you're going to see in here is a lot of different program questions. We won't get into these today because I'm running out of time. But here's that information. There's good research here. It's specific toward museum and movie theater operators. So it tells you a lot about some really good stuff that's come out that we didn't have information on, that we will probably dive into next week, particularly if the platform opens. Okay, so with that, there's the basic, what the bill provides. I think most of those people that can qualify are starting to see that now. And a kind of a timeline of when shuttered venues will open with the venues. The other major change or major guidance that we received this week really came with this program. That's right. This good old program, the good old Employee Retention Tax Credits. And so now that it was in existence last year and you really couldn't access it except if you didn't receive the PPP. Well, that has been changed for this year. We're waiting the final guidance on it, but we're starting to see a few things that are happening. And one of the things the IRS came out with is in a press release and said that companies that did not get loan forgiveness for PPP can get tax credit actually in the rears. You can actually go back to Q2 or Q3. and actually go back and apply for that and receive that tax credit and claim the ERC related to those qualified wages on your fourth quarter return. So that was interesting. I think that a lot of people haven't. It'll be interesting to see how this moves forward with only a third of the businesses actually going through the forgiveness process. So, and worried about the timing, you can actually go in and do the 941X form to amend actually your 941 if you've already filed for fourth quarter. So that's a process that I think during 2021, if this applies to you and you benefit from it, you can actually go back and actually gain something. We mentioned a little bit earlier that EIDL hit a milestone, 200 billion loaned out. That includes now $3.7 million loans during the COVID crisis. And again, it's open till the end of the year and can be used for a variety of purposes, including to pay fixed debt, not the outstanding principal, but an ongoing fixed monthly payment that was in place before your EIDL loan was, and any payroll accounts payable and other things that are out there. And so with that, just the general reminder here, well, let's go back to this real quick and look at this targeted EIDL grant since we talked about it. This is really the IRS code section that I wanted to share with you that we've talked about in the past. It is defined and tells you where you can find the Census Bureau track for where your business is located and to see if it is classified in a low income community. Again, recall that it is 80% of the statewide household income. If I recall from a few weeks back, that was around 80,000. So if your census tract was 64,000 or less, right around there, those are round numbers. You will need specific numbers. And again, you're going to need a 30% decrease in any 8-week period during the pandemic. So a little bit more on that. And here, just a little recap on almost all of these programs are requiring you to have a drop in revenues from 2019 to 2020. And with PPP second draw, it's 25%. Your PPP first draw is 0 because you didn't receive an original one, and that's the original loan. Shuttered venues is 25%, but also there's priority access to it when the portal opens for those that have sustained the largest drop, being 90%. Just talked about EIDL grant at 30%, and then the employer tax credit at 20%. These are a lot of the general provisions we've talked about for PPP2. I want to get to your questions and answer all your questions. So what we'll do is we'll just cruise through these rather quickly. This is interesting for forgiveness, so we'll bring it up, is that you can actually use these other expenditures. And remember, I try to remind people, with your accounting cycle, it has a period of time and that it ends, and those expenses are classified at those times. For this purpose, you can go back and actually now claim expenditures during your covered period. So if you had a covered period that went from April 20th to say October the 4th, then during that time frame, if you had any of these newer expenses, they can count toward PPP forgiveness. In addition to now being eligible for both PPP1 and PPP2 loans that are made in 2021. But you can go back and use them. And some of the ones that we're seeing most is we're seeing the employee protection and workplace modification. Some of these modification expenditures have been quite expensive for a lot of businesses, and they can go back and now use those for at least forgiveness during their original PPPs. So look at these. And the other one that's coming up really popular is the actual expenditures to your suppliers. We wanted some guidance on that because it says that we're essential at the time of purchase to the recipient's current operations and, set current operations. But if you had outline out payments, and this was a real contention with a lot of borrowers, it's they couldn't pay their suppliers, and that was so incredibly important to them. Well, you still need to pay 60% for payroll, but the additional 40% can be used to make supplier payments, and also payments that were covered payments that were made for software or computing services that enhance delivery, payment of trackings, HR, and other expenditures as well. The targeted EIDL advance, we've talked about that, haven't we? And there's some musts for PPP2. You've had to expend your funds, etc. You had to expend all of your funds, and you needed to hit forgiveness with the 60% forgiveness, and it's spend your funds appropriately, which is now a broader category because of what we just discussed. Information on the second draw, some of the tax aspects we've talked about, compliance and things like that. And hey, we'll be back next week. So let's get your questions. So again, hit the question and answer box for your particular questions. I will be hitting these on the fly. So I noticed in our chat before I went there, there's a lot of good references and hearing some good news for the second draw. People are getting approved. Thank you for the birthday greetings for El Mama, as she's known as occasionally. And then also some others that shared information. Thank you. So as I'm known to have to do, let's quit sharing my screen. And now open up your questions in the Q&A box. Okay, Q&A. First question, should we wait for the one-page forgiveness form from our lender or download it from SBA? That's going to vary probably by lender. And with so many different lenders in there, I would probably contact your lender. I would download the form and probably fill it out, since you're going to be the one that's be required to fill it out anyway. So I would probably download it and have the information, and then contact your lender and say, hey, I have the new SBA 3508 form and I'm ready for forgiveness. And hopefully your lender is ready. I noticed a lot of the community banks around the Bakersfield area have been really aggressive and have had forgiveness going for a long time, whereas on the opposite end of the spectrum, a lot of the larger banks, the big, huge banks, have been much slower to the party. Okay, this question's a little long. I hope I can get through it. Our nonprofit, Church and Preschool, received our first PPP. And you're waiting for forgiveness. Second is 25%. You realize the decrease. Our church receives two kinds of income: general offerings to pay our expenses, money for designated accounts, such as this and that. In order to qualify for the second PPP, do we have to include both accounts? So I think I have your question. I don't know if I have an answer for you. So your church and preschool, do they operate under the same employer ID number? And what was actually the process, and what was the revenue that was shown during the actual application for PPP? I think that's the key to this. I think if you have additional information, additional income, so it's going to kind of go back, I would think, to originally how you took out your loan. So if you took it out with payroll that was both from the church and from the preschool, I would think you would need to include both. If perhaps it was only for the preschool, then you might be able to get by that way. Not positive, but you might be able to get by that way. So shoot me an email at kbearden@csub.edu. And let's try to talk about this offline. It is rather specific. It is something that I really haven't been asked before through the forgiveness process. And I think that there's some moving parts in here, but really it kind of goes back to my thinking. Forgiveness goes back to what you applied for and how you initially sought to use and the intent of your original PPP loan. So it's going to matter with the payroll that you had and what payroll was used actually for that process would be my quick answer. Since Congress is still working on the relief, should I wait to do my PPP loan application or wait to see if something better comes out or if they give us a better deal. I think the size is what's going to matter there. If you're over 150, then I think you've got a pretty good deal right now. If everything is copacetic and kosher, and you spend it within your legally responsible areas, no problem. I think I went over the 3508S form, and that is going to be your vehicle if you're 150 or under. Now, if you're 150 and over, then more analysis needs to be put into it. If your business, then it comes down to two questions. One, was your business, and I don't have the definition in front of me, but if it was shuttered for a period of time, and if your business was not able to operate because of the coronavirus, and there's a couple of safe harbors, and you feel comfortable selecting one or two of those safe harbors, and I think the majority of businesses, maybe not all, but the majority are going to be able to use the safeguards if you're over 150. Now, there are going to be businesses that did not close, essential businesses, maybe that were profitable and did well, and those are going to probably need to go through the long form and go through the employee by employee procedure if you're over 150. So kind of a long question, a long answer to a short question. If you already applied for forgiveness, do we need to fill out the updated form and submit? No. If you've already gone through the forgiveness process, then the only question is how they're going to treat your EIDL advance if you received one. So if you had an EIDL advance and that was not part of the forgiveness process, and that's currently in limbo, that is something you'll need to work with your bank on. But if you've applied, if you're one of the 35% that are through forgiveness, congratulations. Hopefully you've been notified by the SBA and it's official now. Okay, next question. It looks like we really should apply for forgiveness for both PPP 1 and 2 now that we use different timeframes for each one. And that would be yes. I think the PPP original loan would be the one that you're going through forgiveness now. The PPP 2 is going to come later, but I found it interesting on that form that there was a box to check on PPP 1 or 2 for those that were 150 and under, 150,000 and less. And that could change. So right now we're probably only focused on PPP 1, so we'll continue to focus there. Will the seasonal be used for ag, such as a beekeeper? Very good question. And I think you'll see a lot of seasonal ag businesses. So if they have a majority of their revenue that is derived in a short period of time, over a 6-month period, then I could definitely see that happening. It's going to kind of depend on where the numbers fly. Okay, next question is, if we are going to try to utilize the employer retention credits, and apparently the rest of the question got cut off. If you are going to use the employer retention credit for unforgiven amounts, if that's going to be the question, then that is something that I would look back and see payroll that was not, and look at the rules as they were stated then. But I really think you need more. You really need more information, and there's more final rules coming and more frequently asked questions from the IRS on the employer retention tax credit. So my best advice would be to wait on that one. How soon after we file a loan forgiveness should we expect to hear from SBA or the lender? Well, the lender has 90 days in order to review your application. If you send it in right at the beginning of PPP opening up, I don't know, individually, each lender is going to be different, but their resources are going to be probably a little more limited, and it's going to slow the process a little bit. But they are given 90 days, and the SBA is given 150 days. So as a borrower, from when your covered period ended, you have 10 months. And then your lender has 3 months. And the SBA has 5 months. So we could easily be into 2022 before some of your original PPP loans are actually forgiven. How do we apply for the EIDL loan? Well, that's a great question. One we haven't gone through. What you want to do is you want to go to the portal. It's directly through the SBA. The SBA has the portal for the actual EIDL loan. Now, remember that there are 3 definitions of EIDL that we use in 3 different programs that have happened. The EIDL loan is the actual 30-year loan at 3.75% that is scored and is put into the SBA portal. Then we have the EIDL grant, which is the 2021 version. And that is actually kind of comes out of the EIDL advance from last year. So quickly, when the EIDL loans were made last year in a rush to get money into people's hands and also to give maybe some money to individuals who were not going to be approved for the EIDL loan, because the EIDL loan isn't an application process and it is underwritten. So they do use your credit score and a few other things on that. For those individuals that wanted to get money out quickly, there was the EIDL advance. And that was anywhere between $1,000 and $10,000. So now this year we have the EIDL grant, and there is no application process for the EIDL grant. SBA has taken the money that they have through this last stimulus bill, and what they're doing is they are actually floating that out to individuals who receive between $1,000 and $9,000 of the EIDL advance last year. And what they're doing is they're requiring, we saw the 30% reduction over a 12-week period, and they're also requiring you to be in a low to moderate income census tract as defined against the state household income average. Okay, another windbag answer. Guess I'm a windbag today. Should we use the 8-week covered period for forgiveness as not to double dip? Interesting question. One thing that you can do, and I think this came out in the recent forgiveness, and thank you for asking this question, is because we've always talked about covered periods being 8 or 24 weeks. But with the Economic Aid Act, you can actually pick any day that your covered period ends during that process. So 8 weeks would be day 56 after you received your funds, and 24 weeks would be 168. Any way in there, you can actually cut it off and say that's the end of my covered period and apply for forgiveness. So that was a little bit vague. And of course we had 8 weeks until June 5th. After that was 24 weeks, but you could elect 24 weeks if you got the loan before June 5th. What is the deadline for forgiveness for PPP1? Okay, I think I kind of hit that. As a borrower, you need to get it in. You need to get it in before 10 months. That's the official deadline, but you want to get it in before 10 months at the end of your covered period. So really the only, if you got a loan in say the middle of, let's say, I'll just use numbers off the top of my head here, April 15th, and you elected an 8-week covered period. So let's just jump up from April, May, June 15th. June 15th, you go 10 months, go back 2 more months, and it would be April 15th. So that would be the very earliest if you elected an 8-week covered period and you got one of the earlier loans around April 15th. So again, you have 10 months. I would get it in sooner, but then again, if you have now the tools to do that with the 150,000 and less form we went over today, the 3508S, then you should be good to go. Okay, that's it for questions. We'll be back next week. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back for number 50. It only means we're coming up on a 1-year anniversary that we will not be celebrating. So back next week, my tentative guests next week are going to be a couple officials with the city of Bakersfield, including Cecilia Grego, to talk about a couple new programs that Bakersfield has coming out. So hopefully that program is moving forward, and we'll talk about that next week. But in the meantime, email us questions. We'll be here if you want to talk to a consultant, have more information. A lot that we went over, tons of information. We do have a lot of advisors out there that are willing and able to help you. So for this week's webinar, I'm Kelly Bearden. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye now.